She said 5 words, "We're done here, Mom," in a text. No explanation, no phone call, just those words and a period. I was standing in my kitchen with the same hands that once braided her hair, folding the same towel that dried her childhood tears, and all I could do was stare at the screen. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't reply with a paragraph. I just typed, "Understood," and turned off my phone. That silence? It did something. Something final. There's a kind of quiet that only exists on a lavender hill after the last harvest. That's where I was the morning she said she was coming home. Bell Hill, Oregon, where I've lived for 32 years, where Elmer and I raised both flowers and children. That land has its own heartbeat if you know how to listen. The slow sway of purple rose in late summer wind, the groan of porch wood from 1,000 sunrises, and the sound of a widow's breath as she boils water for 1 cup of tea instead of 2. I still wore his cardigan most mornings, not because I needed the warmth, but because it smelled faintly of cedar and the life we built. I kept the same habit for years, up by 5:30, tea by 6, out to the Rose by 6:30. And that morning was no different, except the air had a sharpness to it. Not weather, something else. The kind of sharp that comes before a fracture. When Carla texted to say she'd be coming back for a few weeks to realign and recharge, I didn't ask questions. She hadn't been home in almost 10 months. Not for Easter, not for Elmer's birthday, not even for the day I finally had to take down the swing set she used to climb. Still, I said, "Of course, you're always welcome here." Because I meant it. Or maybe because mothers are conditioned to mean it, even when we shouldn't have to. The last time she came home, she stayed for 3 days. She complained about the Wi-Fi, the smell of the kitchen, the dust on the windows. She said the place felt stuck in time. I offered to make her favorite, peach cobbler, and she said she was cutting back on sugar. I didn't argue. I just made it anyway. She didn't touch it. Still, I kept offering. That's the thing about us, women like me. We offer, even when we're invisible, even when we're tired, even when we know it won't be returned. But this time, something felt different. She arrived with a suitcase and a laptop, but also with a plan. Her voice on the phone that morning was clipped, rehearsed, like she was pitching something. "I've been thinking, Mom, this place could be something really special. People pay thousands now to disconnect and soak in authenticity. You've got that here, naturally. Let's use it." I thought she meant a family retreat, repainting the shutters, maybe fixing the squeaky barn door. I was wrong. The house was clean when she pulled into the driveway. It always was. I had already dusted the top shelf where Elmer's old boots sat, swept the porch twice, wiped down the window glass. I wanted her to walk into something that still felt like love. That's what homes are. Love you can touch. She walked in wearing sunglasses and heels, hugged me with one arm while typing something on her phone with the other. "This place looks quaint," she said, and smiled like it was both a compliment and a warning. I nodded, unsure how to take that. She sat at the table and started opening folders on her laptop before even unpacking. She used words like marketability, experience immersion, and narrative branding. I didn't understand all of it, but I heard one thing loud and clear. This wasn't a visit. This was a pitch. Still, I made her soup that night. The same recipe her grandmother passed to me on our first Christmas in this house, rosemary, potato, and corn from the back garden. She took one spoonful, then checked her phone. "Tastes earthy," she said, and went back to typing. I said nothing, but I felt something break even if I couldn't name it yet. The next morning, she brought out a stack of photos and a list of things she wanted to reimagine. The handmade wooden sign Elmer carved the year Carla was born? Too rustic. The mismatched chairs on the porch? Not cohesive. The dried lavender bundles hanging from the rafters? Overly sentimental. I listened. I nodded. But inside, I was already taking stock of what would be mine to protect. She hadn't even been home 48 hours, but I could already feel the shift, like the house was bracing for a storm only I could see coming. And maybe that's why I didn't say no. Maybe that's why I let her walk into this place like it was hers to renovate, because a part of me still wanted to believe she remembered what it felt like to belong here. Looking back, I see it clearly now. That week wasn't just a homecoming. It was the beginning of something being erased. And as strange as it sounds, it was also the beginning of my own revenge story. Not the kind with shouting or slamming doors, but the kind you carry deep in your bones, where you decide no one gets to rewrite what you lived, not even your own blood. By the third morning, the kitchen didn't feel like mine anymore. The coffee still brewed the same, the wind still moved through the screen door in that familiar westward way, but the energy had shifted. Carla's voice carried through the house like a podcast, clipped, sharp, full of momentum. She spoke in phrases like build the narrative and optimize visual presence. She wasn't talking to me, she was talking through me. That morning, she walked in while I was kneading dough. Rosemary sourdough, the same recipe her grandmother made every Sunday after church. She glanced at the flour on my hands, then waved her phone. A photographer's coming around 11. We'll need natural light, minimal clutter. Can we move the mixer and those jars for the shots? The jars were my spice blends, dried marjoram, lemon thyme, and sage, each labeled in Elmer's handwriting. I opened my mouth to say no, but instead I wiped my hands and started clearing the counter. The photographer arrived early. Young, polite, he looked around like he was scouting a movie set. Carla followed him, pointing out corners of the room, talking about rustic charm and inherited character. When he raised the camera, she asked me to stand by the stove. Just hold the spoon and smile softly, she said, like you're remembering something warm. I was remembering something, all right. The last time she stood in this kitchen and baked ginger cookies for her father's retirement, she was 16. She burned the first batch. He ate them anyway. That memory was real. This was posed. But I smiled, because I wasn't ready to draw a line yet. I hadn't decided where it should go. After they wrapped up, Carla showed me mock-ups on her laptop. A logo, Lav & Co., gold lettering, thin serif font, a sprig of lavender drawn so clean it looks sterile. It's modern, she said, professional. We already secured the domain and socials. I asked, where does Bell Hill go? She blinked. Mom, Lav & Co. is scalable. Bell Hill sounds like a county fair booth. That was the first time I felt a real burn in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like grief in slow motion. Like something was dying right in front of me, and I couldn't stop it because it was smiling. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone while Carla paced in Elmer's old office. She'd claimed it within hours of arriving, moving his tools and papers into labeled bins so she could fit her dual-screen setup. She'd asked politely, I'd said yes, but now I heard her say things like asset alignment and launch phase through the closed door. I stared at the table runner Elmer's mother had crocheted by hand, now pushed to the side to make room for Carla's laptop. I wanted to speak, but I swallowed it. Do you know that feeling? When you realize your home is no longer yours, not because someone stole it, but because they're rewriting it in front of you with a smile? If you've ever sat in your own kitchen and felt like a guest, I hope you'll share your story in the comments. We don't talk about that part enough. The quiet loss, the erasure. The next day, 2 assistants arrived to stage the living room. They rearranged the furniture, removed the quilt from the couch, and replaced the photo of Elmer and Carla hiking with a high-contrast print of lavender fields, black and white, clean, distant. The room smelled like lavender, but it didn't feel like it anymore. I watched from the doorway. I wasn't asked to help. I wasn't even acknowledged. I went back to the kitchen and stirred the beans on the stove. Not because anyone wanted them, but because that's what I did. I made meals, I built warmth, even if no one tasted it anymore. That evening, Carla set the table with beige ceramic plates and new flatware. Brand aligned, she said, more cohesive than the old blue ones. I sat down and looked at my hands. The skin was thinner than it used to be, more veins, more stories. Hands that once sewed Halloween costumes, lifted her when she fell off bikes, cracked eggs with her on Sunday mornings. Now I wasn't even allowed to pick the plates. I asked quietly, "Did you find the photo of your dad and you on the creek trail?" She paused. "Yeah. I moved it to a drawer. Didn't fit the visual language." Visual language. I didn't ask more. I just folded the napkin in my lap and excused myself from dinner early. My appetite had vanished somewhere between the soup and the silence. Late that night, I passed Elmer's office on the way to bed. The door was ajar. Her laptop screen glowed. Carla was still typing, still locked into whatever digital dream she was chasing. On the desk was the framed photo I'd asked about, now folded in half, shoved beside a stack of product samples. The girl in that photo, the one laughing under the Oregon sun with her father's arm around her shoulders, she had vanished. Replaced by this efficient, articulate stranger with plans and metrics and style guides. I closed the door gently. I didn't cry. But I went to bed that night knowing something had changed. Not just in her, in me. She wasn't visiting, she was taking. And I'd just begun to realize what it would cost me to stay silent. The morning came like any other. I tied my robe tight, pulled back the curtains, and let in the gray light of Oregon fog. The lavender fields were barely visible from the kitchen window, soft shapes blurred at the edges. That haze? It matched the way I felt inside. I boiled water for tea the way I always had, even though I knew no one else would be joining me. Carla had already left for the day, off to meet with what she called regional contacts. She barely touched breakfast anymore. She used to sit at this very table with syrup on her chin, swinging her legs and asking for just one more bite. That girl hadn't been here in a long time. I sat with my tea for almost an hour before getting up. The silence in the house had grown heavier, not peaceful, heavy, like something sacred had been cracked open and left unattended. That afternoon, a large envelope arrived in the mailbox. Heavy paper, glossy seal, addressed not to me, but to Lavenkampen. It was the kind of envelope that didn't just carry ink. It carried decisions. I opened it anyway. Inside were the registration documents. Carla had filed paperwork to convert our home, the house Elmer built with bare hands, the land we cleared inch by inch, into a commercial venue. The entire property, according to the documents, would now be repurposed as an immersive wellness experience destination. Every square foot of Bell Hill was mapped out. Bedroom allocations, parking areas, a branded merchandise cabin, lavender-infused cooking classes, all under a new LLC. Her name stood alone. No mention of Joanne Bell, no mention of Elmer, no mention of 32 years of sunrise and dirt and sacrifice. I read every page, twice. Then I placed it gently on the counter like it might shatter. I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I just stood there, running my fingertips over the edge of the envelope again and again, like I was waiting for the paper to apologize. I didn't know that grief could feel so quiet. Not the loud kind with funerals and casseroles and sympathy cards, but the slow, creeping kind. The kind that makes your own home feel like a stranger's Airbnb. Later that evening, Carla came in with her voice too high, her steps too quick. "Great meeting today. A lifestyle blog wants to feature us. They love our look. And guess what? We're trending. I mean, it's small, but still." I didn't respond. She didn't notice. She didn't see the envelope on the counter. Or maybe she did, and chose not to ask. That night, I didn't cook. I opened a can of soup and sat at the far edge of the porch, away from the lavender rose, away from everything that felt staged. The wind was picking up. Storm clouds were crawling over the ridge, but I didn't go back inside. The porch creaked the way it always had. That was the only sound I trusted anymore. When I finally went to bed, I passed by the guest room. Carla had started calling it her workspace. It was lit up with mood boards, logo drafts, a ring light near the window. I paused at the doorway, wondering if she even saw what she was doing, not just to the house, but to me. A few days later, another package arrived. This one wasn't as formal. Just brown boxes, bulk deliveries, branded napkins, merchandise tags, tasting spoons with Lavenkampen etched into the bamboo. They filled the kitchen, my kitchen. The space where I once taught her how to measure vanilla, where Elmer kissed my shoulder as I pulled pies from the oven, now reduced to a prep station for someone else's idea of healing. Then came the stylist. She brought clothes on hangers, asked if I had any solid, neutral colors. I offered my Sunday dress, green with small embroidered flowers. Elmer always said it made me look like spring. She smiled politely and handed me a beige apron instead. "This is more on brand," she said. Carla nodded. "It'll photograph better." So I wore it. They asked me to hold a pot of beans I didn't cook, told me to smile like I was remembering a warm story. I smiled, but inside, my chest ached. Not from anger, from something worse, detachment. That night, I sat on the porch again. The sky was split between fading blue and creeping gray. Somewhere behind me, they were talking about investor timelines. I couldn't hear all the words, but I heard enough. "Will soft launch by fall. There's strong potential in scalable experiences." I thought about the first time Carla fell in the creek out back. She was 8, covered in mud, cried for 3 seconds, then asked if she could try again. I had never been prouder. Now I couldn't even find her in her own face. The next morning, I walked the property, not with purpose, just with instinct. Past the shed, through the edge of the garden, down to the sign Elmer had carved, "Bell Hill Lavender. Home is a place you grow into." The sign was gone. In its place, a blank, polished plank. No name, no memory, no home. The next morning, I opened the drawer in the hallway closet, the one with the rusted pull and the chipped white paint. It had been years since I touched the old folder wrapped in butcher twine, tucked beneath stacks of seed catalogs and faded Christmas cards. But my hands knew exactly where to go. I untied the knot slowly, as if it might come undone on its own. Inside was the envelope Elmer had left with our lawyer just 3 weeks before he passed. I'd forgotten how neat his handwriting was. Rigid, but thoughtful, like he carved letters the way he carved wood, steady, intentional. There was only one page, and one line that stopped my breath. "The land we cleared with our hands, especially the south lot, belongs to Joanne until her last breath. No one touches that without her say." He didn't write long letters. He didn't say much about legacy or law. But he had known. Somehow Elmer had known I might need this. Not a love letter, but a boundary. I sat down at the kitchen table with the letter in both hands, like it was a compass pointing back to some piece of me I'd almost forgotten. Carla's voice carried faintly from upstairs, something about closing the loop and branding tears. I didn't care. Not anymore. I folded the paper and placed it in a fresh envelope. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Lois. Lois and I hadn't spoken in nearly 6 years. She used to run a legal clinic out of the basement of the old Methodist church in Pine Grove. We'd volunteered together during the early years, teaching local women about land rights, inheritance, and how not to get erased from what they'd built. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Well, I'll be," she said. "I was just thinking about you the other day." I didn't waste time. "Lois, I need to ask a few questions about property trust protections, inheritance boundaries, and what I can do to keep my name on what's mine." She didn't ask why. She just said, "Let's begin." That afternoon, I dug through every drawer, every file box in the attic, every plastic tub in the shed. I found the original property deed, hand-drawn boundary lines, tax records going back to '92, even the note Elmer had scribbled on the back of an envelope reminding me to never trust anyone who calls land an asset. By sunset, I had everything I needed stacked in a manila folder. I slipped it under my mattress, not out of fear, out of clarity. At dinner, Carla asked me to look over a draft menu. She'd included avocado toast, lavender lemonade, and vegan chili. When I asked about the rosemary bread or the peach pie we used to make together, she said it didn't align with the modern palate. I asked, "What about the apple butter cake?" She paused, then shook her head. "Too old-fashioned." The way she said it wasn't cruel, but it was final. She patted my hand. "Don't take it personally, Mom. It's just evolution." I smiled. I nodded. But that night, I stayed up late in the pantry. Not hiding, just choosing where I belonged. The shelves still held the jars I'd labeled by hand. Cinnamon sticks, dried orange peel, clove. Each scent felt like a decade. I ran my fingers over the grooves in the wood, where Elmer once carved a heart with our initials, J+E, before sealing the shelf with beeswax. I hadn't looked at that carving in years. I pulled out the old binder, the one with recipes written in ink that had bled from steam and time. I flipped to the page with the apple butter cake. Elmer had underlined too much nutmeg twice in pencil. I never agreed, but I never erased it. That night, I baked it anyway. The kitchen filled with cinnamon and roasted apple, the kind of scent that seeps into your bones. I left the cake on the counter with 2 forks. No fanfare, no plating, just the truth. Carla came in later than usual, still on the phone, still speaking in a voice that wasn't hers when she was younger. She stopped when she saw the cake. "Oh, wow, that smells familiar," she said, almost surprised. She took one bite, closed her eyes. "It's good. Reminds me of something, though I can't place it." Then she walked away. I stood by the sink, rinsing the forks. It wasn't anger that settled in my chest. It wasn't even hurt. It was something quieter. A line, a gentle, clear line that only I could see. And I knew right then I wouldn't fight her with yelling. I wouldn't argue about signs or menus or what the brand was called. I would draw my line with paper and pen, and Elmer's words would hold it. No one was going to rename this land while I was still breathing. I didn't tell Carla anything. Not when she asked if I'd move some of my mason jars from the kitchen shelf to make space for display items. Not when the stylists came again with more props that looked like they belonged in a catalog, not a home. Not even when she replaced the photo of Elmer's first tractor with a minimalist print of a lavender sprig and the words, "Wellness is wealth." I said nothing, because by then I had already begun. Every morning before the sun rose over Bell Hill, I laid out documents on the dining table, blueprints, copies of tax forms, Elmer's old land notes, the hand-sketched layout of the south lot. Lois sent me instructions in plain language, and I followed them like scripture. Step by step, with my reading glasses on and a pen in my hand. It took 1 week to gather the full record, 2 days to notarize, 38 minutes at the courthouse in Pine Grove to file the trust. The clerk, a young man with a kind face and a voice like gravel, looked up after stamping the final page. "So just the sections being placed under trust?" "Yes," I said. "The original homestead, the garden, the south lot. And who's the sole trustee?" I looked him in the eye. "Me, until I say otherwise." He nodded. "Smart." I walked out into the Oregon air, not triumphant, not relieved, just steady. Like a fence had finally been mended after years of leaning in the wind. That evening, Carla breezed into the kitchen mid-conference call, gesturing wildly with one hand and sipping oat milk with the other. She smiled at me, half present, then reached for the salad mix I'd chopped an hour earlier. "We're getting buzz, Mom," she said between bites. "The blog post about our mother-daughter legacy is trending. People love the concept." "Concept?" I repeated, quiet. "And which part of that concept do I belong to?" She didn't hear me, or chose not to. Her phone buzzed again, and she was gone up the stairs. Later, I went out to the porch. The air was warm but unsettled, the kind of summer night that carried too many stories in its breeze. I took the folded trust papers from my apron pocket and laid them flat across my lap. The ink was dry. The border lines were clear. My name, printed in sharp black letters, sat right where it needed to be. Elmer would have liked that. Carla hadn't noticed the shift yet. She was too busy preparing for an investor meeting later that week. She'd invited a media rep to come tour the property, her words, and present a vision deck. The media consultant showed up in polished boots and colognes that didn't belong near soil. He introduced himself with a rehearsed smile and said he'd love to capture the essence of the place. I didn't say a word. I just watched him stroll through my kitchen, photographing the spice rack Elmer built, the pantry door Carla had asked me to repaint for consistency, and the corner where my mother's recipe box still sat. Then he paused in front of the photo above the stove. Elmer and me, our first summer here, still covered in dirt from planting lavender, still glowing with stubborn joy. He pointed at it. "Maybe we can use this one," he said, "but cropped, obviously." I didn't answer. I reached up, took the frame off the wall and turned it face down. He blinked. "Oh, okay." He left shortly after that. That night, the silence in the house was louder than any storm. Carla came down to the porch where I sat with a cup of coffee. Black, quiet, real. She didn't speak at first. She just stood by the railing, eyes on the dark horizon. Then she asked, "Are you angry?" I shook my head. "No, I'm tired." She looked surprised. She always thought silence meant approval. "I'm just trying to build something that lasts," she said, "something people can connect to." I stared out at the dark fields. "This place already lasts, Carla," I said. "You just stopped seeing it. Legacy isn't packaging, it's memory that refuses to fade." She didn't argue, but she didn't stay long either. She went back inside without another word. The door closed softly behind her. I listened until even her footsteps upstairs disappeared. I knew she'd find out soon about the trust, about the protected land, about the fact that her expansion plans would hit a legal wall she never saw coming. And when she did, it wouldn't be loud. It would be still. She'd realize the roots here weren't for sale. And I didn't need to raise my voice to say so. The morning it happened, the air was too still. I knew before I opened the curtains. You can feel those things when you've lived long enough, a kind of hush that settles into the house before something shifts. Bell Hill wasn't quiet the way it used to be, with birdsong and warm breeze. It was quiet like the pause before glass breaks. I was pouring coffee when Carla's voice echoed from upstairs, sharp, fast, just on the edge of panic. "That wasn't supposed to go out. Who sent that? Find out now." She came down in a blur. Her heels clicked like they didn't belong here, and her breath was clipped short. She didn't even notice me standing by the stove, just paced the length of the living room, phone glued to her ear, fingers tightening around the handle like it might snap. It didn't take long for the email to reach her, or the rest of them. Lois had sent it, exactly as we discussed. No signature, no explanation, just a scan of Elmer's handwritten letter. The official trust documents and the boundary map that showed the south lot, garden, and original homestead were now protected. Untouchable. Off limits to Lav and Comey and its ambitions. Attached at the bottom, a single line pulled from Elmer's own hand. No one touches that land unless she says so, until her last breath. I didn't need to sign it. My silence was the signature. The fallout was immediate. That week, the regional blog canceled their feature. The investors pulled out of the immersive experience deal. The media consultant ghosted. A few even sent polite emails thanking Carla for her time but expressing concern over the property dispute and the unexpected legal limitations. She called Lois, then tried calling me. I didn't answer. She called again, then again. By the 7th call, I had silenced my phone. By the 12th, I had unplugged it from the charger. By the time I turned it back on 3 days later, there were 79 missed calls, all from her. I didn't return a single one. Instead, I walked the south lot at sunrise, the way Elmer used to. Slow, deliberate, steady. I touched the rosemary bush we planted on our 10th anniversary. I knelt beside the first lavender row and pulled 2 weeds by hand, just like always. I was still here. Still standing, and the land still knew me. If you've ever protected something in silence, something no one else thought was worth defending, you'll understand why I didn't need to say a word. You'll understand why the strongest kind of justice never needs applause. If that hits close to home, maybe leave a comment below. Not for pity, but because someone else out there needs to know they're not crazy for holding their line. That evening, Carla came home just after sunset. She didn't slam the door, didn't throw accusations. She walked into the kitchen and stood there like a guest. The branded tote bags were gone. The ring light was unplugged. Even the printed logo mock-ups had been shoved into a drawer somewhere. I didn't say anything. I just kept slicing the peaches for the cobbler. She leaned against the door frame, eyes tired in a way makeup couldn't hide. "You knew this whole time?" she asked. I nodded once. "Longer than you think." She looked down at her hands, then out the window. "They're gone," she said. "All of them. No one wants to move forward now. They think the project's compromised." I stirred the sugar into the bowl and shrugged. Maybe it was never meant to be a project. She looked at me then, really looked, like for a second she was trying to remember who I used to be before I became the set decoration in her campaign. "I wasn't trying to steal it," she said. "I just thought I was building something bigger." I folded the dish towel slowly. "It was already big," I said. "You just couldn't see it because it didn't come with likes or hashtags." She stood there a little longer, then turned and walked up the stairs without another word. The house exhaled. I hadn't realized it had been holding its breath. That night, I sat at the dining table and opened Elmer's ledger again, the one he kept in his stubborn handwriting. He had written a note on the inside cover I'd forgotten. "If you protect it, it will grow. If you sell it, it will forget you." I didn't need the town to know what I'd done. I didn't need my name on a plaque or a feature in a magazine. All I needed was that small slice of land to remember me. And maybe, in time, for Carla to remember too. But not today. Today, I just needed the oven to bake even and the peaches not to stick. I spent the next week doing what I hadn't done in years. I pulled weeds, kneaded bread, hung herbs to dry, took the cracked terracotta pots out of the shed and repotted the lavender starters I'd been putting off for seasons. It wasn't some grand declaration of independence. It was muscle memory, and it felt good, like reclaiming a rhythm that had always been mine. I didn't speak much to Carla during that time. She mostly kept to herself, sleeping late, tiptoeing through the house like she didn't quite belong, which, in a strange way, was true. She'd built a world here, yes, but one that hovered above the soil, never touching it. Now that it had come crashing down, she didn't know where to stand. She'd peek in the kitchen some mornings. I'd offer coffee. Sometimes she accepted, sometimes not. But I noticed her phone stopped buzzing. No more business calls, no new logo drafts, no stylists or marketing consultants swarming the porch. Just the quiet hum of a house going back to itself. One morning, I found her in the pantry staring at the shelves like she didn't recognize them. "You looking for something?" I asked, not unkindly. She turned, holding a jar of dried lemon peel. "I forgot how this used to smell." "It still does," I said. "You just forgot how to be still long enough to notice." She didn't respond, but she didn't put the jar back either. That night, I cooked for the first time in weeks, not just for me. I roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, mashed potatoes with the skins still on, steamed green beans with a knob of butter like Elmer used to love. I even made the biscuits from her childhood, the ones that always collapsed in the middle but tasted like a warm afternoon. Carla came to the table without being called. She sat quietly, took a bite, then another, said nothing. But she finished everything on the plate. I didn't press. Sometimes silence is the only bridge we can offer. The next day, I went into town, just a simple trip. Post office, feed store, and a quick stop at the market to pick up stone fruit before the season ended. I ran into two old friends, Ruth and Marlene, near the bins of corn. "Joanne," Marlene said, eyebrows raised, "we heard there was a big blow-up with your daughter's business thing." Ruth leaned in like a secret was about to fall out. "You all right?" I smiled. "Not big, just enough." "Better than all right." They both nodded like they understood. Maybe they did. We've all lost things at our age. Some of us lose time. Some lose people. Some lose ourselves trying to be what our children think we should be. When I got back home, the porch was swept. The mismatched chairs were back in their original places, and the old wooden sign, the one Elmer carved when Carla was born, was hanging again on the front post. Slightly crooked, but still standing. She must have found it in the barn. I stood there for a moment, fingers brushing the wood. The grooves were deeper now, worn by years and weather, but his initials were still there, and so were mine. Later that evening, I heard soft footsteps behind me as I watered the garden. "I didn't understand what I was doing," Carla said quietly. I didn't look at her right away. I just watched the water darken the dirt around the rosemary roots. I know, I said, but it doesn't mean it didn't hurt. She nodded slowly. I was so busy trying to build something that looked good, I forgot it was already real. That was the closest she'd come to an apology. I didn't need more than that. Not yet. I'm thinking of going back to Portland, she added. Just for a bit, reset. I didn't ask how long, or why, or if she'd ever come back. I'll leave the south lot alone, she said. And the kitchen, and everything else. I nodded. You should leave more than that. She looked confused. You should leave space, I said, for things to come back the way they're meant to. She left 2 mornings later, no fanfare, just a single suitcase and a note on the counter. Thank you for keeping the roots when I forgot what they were. I stood in the doorway and watched her car disappear down the gravel drive. I didn't cry, not because I didn't feel anything, but because I finally felt everything. Peace doesn't arrive loud, it settles, and for the first time in a long time, so did I. The house was quiet again. Not the uneasy quiet of tension or the hollow quiet of grief, but the deep, steady kind, like the stillness right after a heavy rain, when everything is soaked and silent and clean. I woke up that Monday to the sound of birds, real ones, not background filler to some wellness video. I stayed in bed a little longer than usual, staring at the ceiling Elmer painted years ago. I could still see the line where he'd missed a corner and never went back to fix it. It made me smile. I wasn't in a rush anymore. I moved through the morning slowly, folded laundry, watered the basil, refilled the bird feeder. I baked bread, not for a shoot or a guest, but just because the house smelled better when I did. I pulled out Elmer's old radio, the one he'd patched together from spare parts in the 80s, and let the soft hum of folk music fill the kitchen. It scratched a little, but so do most things that matter. Outside, the fields had begun to bloom again. The lavender roses weren't as manicured as Carla had once planned, but they were real. Wild in some places, unruly in others, but fragrant and steady. Like me, like this life. Carla didn't call that week. I didn't expect her to. Sometimes distance isn't about punishment. It's about giving each other space to remember who we were before disappointment stretched us thin. She needed that. I did too. I sat on the porch with my coffee, legs tucked under a wool blanket, and watched the breeze move across the fields. The sign Elmer carved swayed gently on its hook. Still there, still speaking without saying a word, I thought back to the years we built this place. How we dug into hard earth with blistered palms, how we slept on the floor before the bedroom was finished, how we planted 1 row at a time, unsure if anything would take. And yet here it was, even after all this. I made a list that afternoon, not of chores or tasks, but of the things I had reclaimed. My name, for one. My rhythm, my pantry, my table, my land. Not in the way that needs to be declared to the world, but in the quiet way a woman lets herself exist again. I wasn't interested in legacy anymore, not the kind with hashtags or campaigns. I was interested in mornings that belonged to me, in baking things that didn't need to be photographed, in feeding people who didn't expect a receipt. I wrote Elmer's name in my journal that night. Just his name. Nothing else. It was enough. The next day I got a letter in the mail. Real paper, real envelope, postmarked from Portland. It was from Carla. Inside was a short note. Mom, I've been thinking about the rosemary chicken, not the one you made last week. The one you made when I had the flu in 4th grade. You put a warm towel on my neck and read to me from that book I hated. I think that's what I was trying to recreate. I just forgot where it started. Thank you for protecting it, even from me. Carla, I read it twice. Then I folded it, placed it in the drawer next to the recipes, and didn't cry. Instead, I went out to the garden. There were weeds to pull and rows to tend. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else, just me. And that was enough. 3 weeks passed without a single phone call. Not from Carla, not from anyone in her circle. No stylists, no content planners, No advisors asking for space or permission or time. Just the rhythm of this place. Sunrise, bird song, the gentle hum of wind rolling over lavender. It was exactly what I needed. I didn't mark the days on a calendar, but my body knew. My knees stopped aching quite as much in the morning. My hands remembered how to move without rushing. I no longer sat by the window waiting for something to come back. Instead, I began building something new. Not big, not loud, just real. The shed, which had become a dumping ground for branded merchandise and broken dreams, slowly returned to its original purpose. I cleared out boxes, swept the dust, and found Elmer's old seed tin stacked behind a crate labeled Media Backdrops. I laughed when I saw it. Then I cried. But just a little. I spent the afternoon planting sugar snap peas in the garden behind the kitchen. Elmer never had the patience for peas, but I liked the way they climbed things, quietly, without permission, like they knew their worth. That evening, I opened my email for the first time in days. Not because I was waiting on anyone, but because I needed to forward a recipe to Ruth, the apple butter cobbler she'd been asking for since our last church potluck. Buried between newsletters and spam was a short message from Carla. Subject: quick question. Do you still have the cinnamon bun recipe from Grandma Helen? I tried one from Pinterest. It wasn't right. No apology, no updates, just cinnamon buns. I read it 3 times before replying, yes, I'll mail you a copy. Use the whole egg in the dough, not just the yolk. That's what makes them hers. Simple, soft. Sometimes that's enough. I printed the recipe that night, wrote a short note on the back in pencil, and tucked it into an envelope with a sprig of dried lavender. Then I went to bed, and I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I stood at the edge of the south lot with my thermos and a notebook. The fog was lifting off the fields, slow and graceful. You could see the outlines of every plant as the sun found its way through. The rosemary, the sage, even the wild mint that kept trying to take over the corner patch. I made a list in the notebook. What stays, what grows, what goes. It wasn't for Carla. It wasn't even for Elmer. It was for me. That afternoon, I put up a sign at the entrance of the garden. Bell Hill by hand. That's what I was calling it now. Not a business, not a brand. Just a name that felt like soil and sweat and memory. I printed it on paper and taped it to the gate. No fanfare, no hashtags, just ink. Around 5 o'clock, Lois called. She wanted to check on the final filing for the protective trust and let me know everything was in place, not just legally, but emotionally. I knew you'd do it, she said. You're the type that doesn't need noise to make noise. We laughed. She asked if I'd consider teaching a workshop next spring for women going through property disputes, just a weekend thing. Share what I'd learned, help them draw lines they've been told not to draw. I said I'd think about it. If you've ever had to reclaim your space after being treated like a prop in someone else's dream, if you've had to quietly rebuild after someone tried to overwrite your story, you'll understand why this chapter of life feels so sacred. And if you've ever been there, I'd love to hear in the comments what helped you come back to yourself. Sometimes, sharing even a sentence gives someone else permission to do the same. That evening, I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not for anyone, not for any holiday, just because it smelled like oranges and cinnamon and reminded me of the years when Carla still climbed onto the counter and snuck cookie dough when she thought I wasn't looking. I made stew, enough for 2. I sat down at the table and ate alone, slowly, quietly, with both elbows on the table because no one was there to correct me. I smiled to myself. Then I set a second bowl in the fridge just in case someone remembered what home tasted like. It was a Sunday morning when I heard the car again. Same tires, same gravel, same pause at the bend in the road. I didn't rush to the window. I didn't pretend not to notice either. I simply folded the dish towel in half, laid it on the counter, and poured a second cup of coffee like it was any other day. The door opened slowly, not timid, but softer than before. Carla didn't call out. She stood in the doorway for a moment as if she needed the house's permission. I looked up, nodded once, and went back to stirring the peach jam. She walked in and sat at the kitchen table, hands empty, hair unstyled. No laptop, no planner, no rush. She didn't ask if she could stay, and I didn't offer permission. We just were. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual. She glanced at the coffee cup I'd set down across from mine. "You always made 2, she said. I nodded. "Habit." She wrapped her hands around the mug but didn't drink. "I'm not here to talk about anything," she said. "I just needed quiet." That was the closest thing to a confession I was going to get, and that was fine. The peach jam bubbled low and slow. I skimmed the foam, added lemon, and moved the pot to the side. She watched me like she used to, the kind of watching where a child doesn't ask how something's made, just wants to be near the making of it. We didn't fill the air with stories. There was no apology, no unpacking of pain. She didn't mention the trust, the collapse, or the email she sent 3 weeks ago. What she did do was slice apples for the tart I hadn't planned to make, quietly, carefully. She reached for the cinnamon without asking. She even sprinkled a little nutmeg, like Elmer used to do when he thought I wasn't looking. At one point, she glanced up. "You kept everything the same." I shrugged. It kept me. We ate the tart warm over chipped plates that had survived more years than her business ever did. The crust crumbled just right. The apples were too soft, but we didn't mind. That afternoon, she followed me to the garden. She didn't kneel, didn't offer to help. She just sat on the bench Elmer built and watched as I staked the pea vines. I could feel her eyes, not judging, not planning, just there. And in that stillness, something softened between us, not repaired, not resolved, but softened. Around dusk, she asked, "Do you ever feel lonely out here?" I wiped my hands on my apron. "Not anymore." She nodded, not in agreement, but understanding. She didn't stay overnight. She never said the visit was temporary, but I knew. The way she looked around the porch before leaving told me this wasn't a return. It was a pause, a moment to exhale. Before she left, she placed something on the kitchen table, an envelope unsealed. I waited until the taillights disappeared before opening it. Inside was a single photo. Me, Elmer, and Carla, from the year we planted the first lavender. We were all covered in dirt, hair wild, cheeks flushed with sun and hope. Written on the back, in Carla's handwriting, "You were always enough. I just didn't know how to say it." I didn't cry. But I sat down, placed the photo against the window pane, and let the light touch it. Like maybe it had waited long enough to come home. I didn't call her after that. I didn't send a message. But the next time I made peach jam, I made a little extra. I labeled the jar with her name, and I set it on the shelf beside the others, just in case she ever needed the taste of what didn't ask for attention. Just grew, anyway. The second time she came back, she didn't park in the driveway. I heard the sound of a car pulling in, but it stopped just at the bend, where the lavender field meets the edge of the woods. She walked the rest of the way up the gravel path, like she wanted the land to greet her before I did. I was out front, hanging laundry, not because I needed to, but because I liked the way the sheets smelled when the breeze caught them. Carla walked up quietly, holding a small basket of something in her hands. She didn't wave. She didn't smile wide, but there was something softer in her face, a kind of steady calm I hadn't seen in her since she was a child watching Elmer work in the barn. "I brought you something," she said. I took the basket. Inside were lemons, real ones, from her small porch tree back in Portland. They were still bright, imperfect, full of scent. "You remembered," I said. She nodded. "You always said store lemons were dry and bitter." We walked inside, and I put the basket on the counter next to the last jar of rosemary honey I'd been saving. She sat in her usual chair, the one she once called outdated. Now she folded her legs under herself like she used to, when she was young, and the kitchen was a place of comfort, not conflict. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. She stayed 3 nights this time, no drama, no tension, no big conversations about what went wrong. Just mornings spent reading on the porch, afternoons helping me move soil in the garden, and one quiet evening when she asked if she could light the candle in Elmer's old holder. She didn't ask to stay forever, and I didn't ask what she planned next. On the third morning, I made biscuits before sunrise, the ones that never rose right, but always tasted like home. She wandered into the kitchen with sleep still in her eyes and reached for one without a word. That was our thank you. We shared breakfast in silence, the kind of silence that isn't heavy anymore. Afterward, she packed her bag, folded the blanket on the couch, and left a note on the counter. It wasn't a goodbye, just a single sentence. I finally understand why you stayed. I found it mid-morning, tucked under the butter dish, and for the first time I felt something settle into place. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, just understanding. From her and from me, she didn't need to move back. She didn't need to become the daughter I once hoped she'd be. She had simply returned, in spirit, if not in residence. That evening, I walked the south lot. The air was thick with lavender and dust. My boots stirred little clouds with each step. I looked out at the rows we once planted together, me, Elmer, and a younger version of Carla who didn't yet know the weight of legacy or the ache of losing her way. And I realized something. She had come back just enough, not to ask for what I'd built, but to honor it. And I didn't need more than that. Sometimes we hold on to people so tightly we forget they must leave to return. Not to us, but to themselves. And sometimes when they do return, it's not to fix the past. It's simply to say, I see you now. That night, I wrapped a jar of peach jam, one of the lemons she brought, and a folded note. I labeled the box, for Carla, in her time. I didn't mail it. I didn't even write her address. I just kept it on the shelf near the others, because I didn't need her to come back to feel whole. I already was. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window in long golden slats when I woke. The house felt different, unhurried, breathing. I lingered in bed a moment, listening to the creak of floorboards, the distant hum of bees among the lavender. On the counter, I found a folded piece of paper, not tucked beneath butter or jam, but laid on top of the recipe book Elmer kept for Grandma Helen's cinnamon rolls. I recognized Carla's handwriting immediately. I'd like to plant something together, under the old willow tree. No branding, just us. I smiled. No explanation, no apology, just an invitation. I dressed quietly and carried fresh coffee to the front porch, where the willow's long branches dripped like a curtain. Carla was already there, hands clasped around a steaming mug, watching the fields wake. She looked up when I settled beside her. No pitch decks? I asked softly. She shook her head, and for the first time in months, she looked at ease. Not today. We stayed silent for a while, letting the morning find us. Then she stood, lifted a bag of young wildflower seedlings, and held it out. Lavender, yes, but I thought we could add some native wildflowers, for the pollinators Dad always talked about. I took the bag. Inside were coneflowers, lupines, and blanket flowers. Bright, unexpected, free. He'd like that. We walked to the willow, the soil soft under our feet. She knelt first, dropped a seed packet into the ground, and patted the earth gently. I followed, planting a row of lupines where sunlight hit the soil. As we worked, she said, I also called the lawyer. I looked up at her. Still keeping me on the trust? She paused, but then nodded. I asked for a joint amendment, you and me as co-trustees. So decisions happen together. Her voice was careful, like she was learning to tread quietly on sacred ground. I touched her arm. That sounds right. She stood and handed me a worn pen. Your turn to sign the garden plan. I scrawled my name on the neat line, feeling the ink press into the paper almost like it pressed into my heart. We walked back to the porch with empty hands but full chests. The sun climbed higher, and the garden behind us looked half-made, half-wild, and entirely ours. Later, we sat at the kitchen table again, this time with fresh lemonade and peanut butter cookies made from Mom's old recipe. We opened a new blank journal labeled Bell Hill Stories and wrote the date at the top. She wrote first, Chapter 1. The day I stopped trying to build an empire and learned how to come home. She passed the pen to me. I wrote, Chapter 2, A Mother's Silent Defense, Stronger Than Any Storm. We paused, reading each other's words. No need to talk. The pages held our stories now. That evening, we invited Lois and Ruth, the friends who'd helped us in the beginning, for a simple dinner of roasted chicken and green beans from the garden. No cameras, no stylists, just laughter that came easily, like the land itself was blessing the meal. After dinner, we stood under the willow, watching fireflies begin their dance. Carla slipped her hand into mine without fanfare. The world felt wide and soft. "Thank you," she whispered. I squeezed her hand, for staying. She didn't respond, but that was fine. Presence was our agreement. If you've ever had to redefine home and reclaim your roots in the quietest way, share one moment in the comments below. Sometimes your story can help someone else find their way back.